talk a little bit about your family and how you came to Crown King.
Okay.
How your family came to Crown King, and then you can just, as long as you're comfortable talking, I'm gonna let you go, okay?
Okay.
And then we can get pictures, grab things, whatever.
Okay.
Perfect, okay. Ready when you are. It's on?
Yep.
Okay. Tony, it is an honor to be with you today, and I want to introduce Tony Nelson to you. And maybe we can start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your family and how did they come to Crown King?
Well, yeah, my family came to Crown King, and my great-grandfather came to Crown King in 1887, and he had been a banker in Illinois, and his bank had had a collapse in the 1870s. There had been a depression-like, and he came to Crown King and invested in the Crown King mine with two other partners, and he managed the mine and ran it, and it did produce enough money that he paid back all the people that had lost any money in his bank, which was kind of unheard of in these days too, I guess. But so that was on my dad's side of the family, and so they were early. And then his daughter, Essie Harrington, his name was George B. Harrington, which is pretty well known here. His daughter, Essie, married my grandfather, who had come from Sweden when he was a young lad, only 4 years old, had gone to up in the area, his family in the area of Wisconsin, or Minnesota, I'm not sure of which one, but anyway, when he was a young man, he sailed around the Horn of South America to the gold fields of California. And so he was an adventurer. And he came to Crown King because the mines were going, and they'd, news travels fast when there's a boom on. And he met my grandmother, Essie, and they got married. They had, 5 children. And so my dad was the second to the oldest, I believe. And so that's how they came to Crown King. My dad was a miner, my grandfather was a miner, and so that's the way that happened. My mother had come from Tennessee in about 1925 or 6, and she was a nurse, and she had been working in Prescott, and Countess Minato, which was a historical figure here, she was a very famous opera singer back in Germany and Austria and Switzerland, that area, had moved here and built a house. The Countess had had an accident. She had got thrown from a horse, and my mother had special nursed her in Prescott, and so when she came back to Crown King, was well enough, she hired my mom to come back with her to be her nurse. And so that's how she came to Crown King, and then she met my dad, of course, and you can just figure out what happened from there. so that's how my family got going. I was the third child, living child that they had, and I was the tailgate, you might say. It was 13 years between my brother and I, and 9 between my sister and I. So. At any rate, I was born in 1940, so that makes me 74 years old right now.
Were you born in Crown King, Tony?
I was not born in Crown King. No, I was born in St. Luke's Hospital, and they went down there to have me. So, but they brought me back pretty quick. So I can't say as I was actually born here, but I was obviously raised here, and so anyway. I have fond memories of my grandfather. He was actually not a grandfather by blood. My other grandfathers had passed away when I was a young lad, and I never knew them, but my grandmother on my mother's side, Ella Yount, had married Walter Tewksbury, who had been a survivor of the Range War in Pleasant Valley in the 1880s, 90s in there, and he had come to Crown King, and he was quite an old fellow, and we'll probably get to seeing some of his history along a little later on here. But at any rate, I have fond memories of him, and I have to tell you, I was born in 40, and so it was a year and a half before we entered World War II. And you know, I've written about this, but it seems like to me that dogs and children have a special talent to sort of have a feel for the aura of what's going on, you know. And I will tell you that during those years of my early childhood, there was like a pall that set over the whole country, and Crown King included, because it was a war that we had to win. It was not like these other ones that we have been into that are off on foreign soil. These were too, but the United States was in a lot of trouble. And of course I had my brother went, and I had uncles and that went to the service. And you know, the whole country was affected by it, and everybody was working for the war effort. My mom sold war bonds, and at that time, when I was a little child, there was no toys made of metal. All metal went to the war effort. There was no automobiles made, and every child, man, woman, and child, had a war ration book, and they had stamps in them, and you had an allotment of how much the stamps you could buy. Shoes, you had to have so many stamps to buy the shoes, leather shoes. You had to have so many stamps to buy sugar, to buy tires for automobiles, and rubber, and all those critical things that were going into the war effort. So that's a picture of mine, and my dad had one, my mom had one. Of course, people traded their stamps around for whatever their needs was, you know, or what needs were, I should say. So anyway.
So how is it that you have so many stamps in that book?
I don't know how that came about. I really don't, but there's one that's gone. I don't know what this was for. This was ration stamp 8, Z8. So I can't tell you that. But anyway, so my first year in school was 1946. All the mines were working in Crown King. Well, I should say all of them, but the Gladiator was a big mine, and the Crown King mine was working, and there was a lot of smaller diggings that individuals had that were producing. And my dad was working at the mine called the Springfield mine, and they had a government loan to open it up, and it produced copper, and he shipped a lot of copper ore out of that, and that was in the 40s and during the war. So my first year in school was 1946, and there was 27 children in school, which is, I don't think there's ever been that many since, you know, at one time in the Little Red Schoolhouse.
And what color was it then?
It was white then, yeah. And so there was a big pot-bellied wood stove that sat there on one end of the school, and in those days we had some pretty good snowstorms around here. You know, winters were kind of tough. And
how did children get to school?
They walked, mostly walked. Yeah, everybody walked to school. Yeah, there was not very many vehicles. There really wasn't. People walked. My dad and his crew used to walk from here to the Springfield mine to work, and walk back home, walk up to the Crown King mine or whatever. It was just part of the day for them, you know. So, yeah. Anyway, I lost my train of thought here.
We were talking about the school.
Yeah.
And your early days.
Yeah, right. Anyway, I had my one and only spanking at that school when I was in the first grade. I don't even know what it was for, to tell you the truth, but I guess I deserved it. But I got paddled pretty good. I remember that. So that was the only one spanking that I ever really got in school, and I guess I must have behaved myself a little bit better. You know. So anyway, I went through 8 grades of grade school here in Crown King. I graduated with 3 other students, which there was 8 in school. It was 4 of us graduated, and I believe that was 1954, if I'm not mistaken. I should say that after the war shut down, and along about 1948, actually 48 and 49, we had a terrible winter here, and the snow was very deep. We had snow that just stayed on the ground all winter long, clear up until June of that year, of 49, and a lot of the mines started to shut down. The copper prices and the metal prices went down, and so they started closing down, and so people started leaving, and Crown King became very economically depressed. And my mother, who was the postmistress here, they canceled the post office and shut it down. And there was a row of mailboxes out in front of the store, and the mailman would come by, and everybody that wanted stamps or something to mail a package or something like that had to meet him here at a certain time of the day, and he would do that business, and everybody got their mail from the mailbox for a long while there in the early 50s. I'm probably starting to ramble on here.
You're
Maybe.
good, you're good. What other businesses were in town that you recall, and were they closing as well?
Well, no, you know, the store, when the post office went out of the store, the store did close for a brief time. And somebody else finally bought it and kind of opened it back up. But there was a saloon, of course, up here, and that was still the main thing here in the 40s and 50s. But there was several buildings between the store and the saloon, and there was a house there, and there were several cabins, outhouses, chicken houses, and things like that. Everybody had chickens or whatever, and we had a real bad fire, and it burned that whole block, and so they rolled all of the booze out of the saloon out into the street because they were afraid it was going to catch on fire. And the store here that we're in right now, the side of the store, the pitch was coming out of the boards, and there was no water, there was no fire department, and it was dry, and there was a hole over in the creek. They dug a hole just to get the seepage, and that's the only water they had, except that and dirt. That's all they had to fight it with. And so they saved the store and they saved the saloon. And that night, a lot of people drank the liquor that was outside there. That's true. Yeah, one guy fell off in the ashes and burned himself because he got drunk. And anyway, it was a bad day at Black Rock around here when that happened. I remember it very well. Anyway, finally, slowly, the land became, the Crown King Acre subdivisions started about 55 or 6, and it was real slow. Some people would come up from Phoenix and build a little cabin there, and it slowly started to evolve into, you know, the homes that it is today. You know, and a lot of vacant land. It was all subdivided up there.
Did that create jobs locally?
It did, yeah. It created some carpenter jobs and things like that. And so things started to, you know, get a little better. And my mom went to Prescott and went back to nursing. And I was kind of here and there, and I was sort of on my own a lot and stayed with my grandmother a lot when I was, you know, in my early teens. And finally, I went to Phoenix. Some people by the name Ed and Ann Fatou wanted me to come down and go to high school. And so I did that. I went down and I worked in their little shop they had, and they had a little business on the side in their home, and then I'd work there in the evening, and I went to North High. So that's where I went to high school at. And so about 1958, the summer of '58, I fought fires. A lot of fires around, and it was just anybody that was able they would get to fight fires, and so in '59 then I worked for the Forest Service that summer, and I worked on the horse thief lookout actually, that in 1960, and then I went on the crew, and then those little jobs didn't last too long, only through the summer and the fire season, and then I worked in the Savoy mine in the winter there for a year, or I'd go down and work on a core drill rig or some drilling rig or anything I could find to make work, So that was up into about the '60s. But I would tell you, back in those days when I was a young child, and the only social activity, there was no churches here in Crown King, and the only social activity, except having, sometimes they'd have a potluck or something somewhere, but the main social activity was dances. And they would have dances at the schoolhouse, or dances at the saloon up here. And at that time, the bar was separated from what they called the dance hall, so everybody took their kids and went down there Saturday evening, And of course, they weren't allowed to have liquor out into the dance hall, but the men would do their drinking in the bar, and folks would dance and all of that, and it was a lot of good times. There was a family here that ran cattle here in those years by the name of Champy, and they had a ranch down by Castle Hot Springs, and they had this allotment in here to run their cattle. Lawton Champy was a pretty famous cowboy. He was a world champion cowboy at the rodeos one year, and they would come up on roundups, and they had a place across where Bear Creek Cabins is. There was a house over there at that time. Anyway, at the dances, they'd get along, there was benches along the wall, and they'd throw the coach down, the kids would lay down and go to sleep. And along about midnight, they would do a dance called the Paul Jones. And the Paul Jones was a round dance. And Lawton Champy would call the dance, like a square dance. This was a round dance. And the men would get around in a circle, and the women inside a circle, and they do all these different circles and go in and throw their hands and cross and back up and do a Congo line or whatever. It was wild. And I'd be trying to go to sleep, and the floor would be bouncing. Actually, it would actually bounce up and down. And it was a wild deal. It was called the Paul Jones. I'll never forget that. As long as, and they did it to a song, a polka, called Under the Double Eagle, which had been a German march song originally, and Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys had made it into a polka, and they just load up the jukebox with nickels for that song and keep going, It was quite a deal. So that was about as wild as it got around here,
Were there live bands as well at the dances? Or
Later on in the late '50s, there was a group of guys that came up here, and they had worked for APS and were doing work up here, and they got their guitars out, and so every time we could get them to come up to play, they'd have dances, and we had just a lot of fun. Those days were a little different than it is now there, because everybody sort of knew everybody else, and it was more of a family-oriented thing. And now it's changed, because you go there now, and it's nothing against them. I mean, it's just the way it is, but you don't know who you're dealing with all the time out there. So, but we had a lot of fun at those dances. I had a lot of fun, and so anyway, that was good times in Crown King. That part was, but.
You talked Yeah, you talked about potlucks. Were they for certain causes or celebrations or?
Yeah, and what mainly it was they called them box dinners. The women, and they would have them at the schoolhouse, and the women would make a box, and they would have the dinner in there, fried chicken or whatever with it, you know, and then they would have their cakes put up there, and the men would bid on them, but the boxes were unmarked. So, well, I suppose the guy's wife, he would know which one to bid on, but they'd have a raffle. It was a raffle thing. And I can't really tell you what for, is to raise money for some kind of a little cause, you know. And, but I remember going to those, and the guys had bid on these boxes, you know. And my sister, she was pretty good looking, so they'd try to find out which one was her box, you know, and yeah, so it was quite a deal, yeah. That was fun too, and so the only church we had there had been a Catholic church here at one time, back in the old days, and old Tom Anderson, who owned the saloon, had bought it, and from the Catholic church, and then he had rented it out as a little cabin and stuff like that. So. But we always called it the church. In fact, I think it still had the cross on top of it, even though it was, you know, but it burned up during that fire I was telling you about. So the only other religious things that ever happened, there was a pastor that came out from Prescott to some of the potlucks, and people would get together, or a box dinner or whatever, and very mild. He would, you know, just say a few words and say the blessing and stuff like that, and that'd be about it, you know. But he was quite an old gentleman, and he loved to come to him. His name was Charles Franklin Parker, and he was a pastor of the Congregational Church in Prescott. He was quite a gentleman, and we appreciate him coming out here, obviously. But so that's I don't know where we want to go from here. Yeah.
So why don't we come back then to some of the subjects that you
Okay.
touched on a little bit. What can you tell me about your toddler days when you were very young? You know, how were you cared for? What toys did you have? You know, any memories that you have, like maybe 0 through 5?
Okay, well, actually, you know, I suppose people were poor, but they didn't even know they were poor, you know. We always had something to eat, I know that. And as far as toys go, I would play with my brother's old toys, which were metal or whatever. But when we'd go to Prescott, it was always looking forward to going to W.F. Woolworth store. And all the toys were wooden or glass. And then finally, towards the end of the war, we started getting plastic things. But those wooden toys and stuff like that, and so, you know, and you know, it was. I had a few friends about my age, but not too many. But I had one little friend that lived across the road from me up there, and her name was Edith Moores, and her dad did the trucking for the Gladiator Mine. And we would play together. I remember that, and she was quite a little gal. So we graduated together in 8th grade, also. Yeah.
Did you have kindergarten at the school? Or did
No,
you start school
no,
when
it
you
was just 1st grade, and so we just really began to learn our numbers and ABCs in 1st grade. You know, nowadays the kids already pretty well know that, but. Yeah, and so, you know, I was not a real great student, but I managed anyway.
So when you started school, what was a typical school day like? Did you bring your lunch to school? Did you have recess?
Yeah.
How did a day function?
Yeah, we did. We'd have 2 recesses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and we all brought our lunch to school, and it was a carry-on, and of course, there was only one teacher to take care of everybody through 1 through 8. So she devoted her time with different ones, and so she would give you your work to do and then go on to the next one and everything like that, yeah. And so it was quite a chore. Looking back at it, she had her hands full, and I had several teachers. When I was real sick one winter and I missed a lot of school and I lost a grade. And the next year there was a teacher, my favorite one, her name was Mrs. Beatty, and I made 2 grades in 1 year with her.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a difference in teachers, ones you really like and want to work for, so.
What were the subjects that you had in school?
Oh yeah, of course, we had writing and, all of that writing and not too much printing, mostly cursives. We did a lot of that, cursives work. And of course we had history. We did our history and math. We had our math, history, and pretty much those basic subjects. When up into the upper grades, you got into civics, and we had Arizona government and U.S. government and Constitution, stuff like that, yeah, which I guess, they still do. I don't know what they do nowadays, but there were no computers. There were no little calculators. You had to do that in your head, so, yeah, so the kids nowadays have a different format, really, of learning. There's so
When you
much.
brought your lunch to school each day, how did you bring it, and what kind of things would be in your lunch?
Okay, I had a little metal lunchbox, and of course, when I got up to where I could get one like my dad's, that was really cool, And it was sandwich, a lot of peanut butter and jelly, and there, we wouldn't be alive without peanut butter and jelly, and peanut butter and jelly and things like that. And then when things got really bad here, like I was telling you in the 50s, early 50s, there was one year that after my mom had lost the post office job, that we stayed the winter, and we had a tough time of it. And I had bean sandwiches. We ate beans for almost 3 months straight, and every way you could think of having beans, we had beans, frijoles, and so it was tough times, but I'll never forget those times. They were good times too, in a way. But we struggled, but we made it. And then she went on to work in town, and things got a little better. And I was old enough to start helping these old timers around here. I started working when I was pretty young. I'd cut wood for people when I was 10. I'd chop wood for them for 10 cents an hour or whatever like that, And then I finally, probably getting off, but these old timers, the work was very important to them. The job was extremely important because there wasn't many jobs and that paid. And so if they had a job and you had a job, you better really work, or somebody else would do it. They'd get somebody else. And so I started out being the gopher. I'd get the tools, or do this or do that, and running here and there for them. And we'd worked on a lot of little projects. I remember the old house and behind here, Mr. Patterson's house, of redoing the foundation, and I'd help them do that or whatever. So and then they tore down some buildings at the Crown King mine, and I got a job pulling nails and helping with that. And so I was always able to find a little something to do, or painting the school, like I painted the school a couple of times. And so, yeah, and I was just pretty young, I was 12, 14 years old. So it worked out all right, and I was always able to work.
You were mentioning to me about the schoolhouse, that it was white, but then how did it become red?
Well, they hired me to paint it was like a little contract to paint the school, and they had the paint. It was red paint, so they wanted it red, so it got red. And it got red, and it stayed red. So, and of course, that's before they added on the library and extra rooms there. It was just one room, and and of course, when we went to school, we had outhouses. The kids did. There was no inside plumbing when I went to school there, And yeah, so.
Was there any running water? Did you have a pump?
There was running water. There was a tank that sat on the outside that was just gravity feed into the thing, but it was rainwater off the roof. So the people would bring their own drinking water and things like that. They'd have drinking water from the mine or whatever, yeah.
I commend you for being so well behaved, but I bet there were some children that you went to school with that may not have been so well behaved.
Well, yeah, they
What were
got,
some of the antics or some of the things that they did that were considered misbehavior?
oh, well, obviously talking, throwing spitballs or paper wads, making airplanes, that kind of stuff. Didn't go over very well, but we had some pretty strict teachers. We really did, and they seemed like they were able to handle it pretty well, you know. And they would send them into. They had a little cloakroom where the kids put their clothes and or their coats, and so if somebody got too bad, you'd send them in there and make them stay in there. Yeah, so it's kind of a timeout deal. Yeah.
How were birthdays, holidays, celebrations, events, how were they celebrated?
Well, yeah, we'd have little birthday parties here and there. Not too many, if I recall, you know, but they would have them for the kids, and you know, but usually in the person's home, wherever the child lived, and you know, so those kind of things. And I'm trying to think of what other events they had. They would have, sometimes they'd have mining contests. You know, you've probably heard of those. They still have them, and I think up at Jerome, and the drilling contest and the mucking contest, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. They'd have those once in a while, yeah. And so they had those, and oh yeah, we used to play baseball. I loved baseball, and we would play baseball at recess, and out here in front of the store we'd have our little baseball games, you know. But everybody would play, even the grown-ups would come out there and play, you know. And of course, you know, so, well, that was my big dream, to be a baseball player, but that never happened, so didn't get there. But I loved it. It was great. And we'd play dodgeball, kickball, and a game called Ante Over. Ante Over, there was an old building at the end of the school ground, and we'd take the ball and throw it up and over, say, Ante Over, and who was on the other side had to catch it, and they'd throw it back over. It was, yeah. Walnut fights, dirt clod fights, rock fights. I guess that got pretty bad. That got a little hairy. I got hit in the head with a walnut one time. It hurt. My sister said, "Well, you shouldn't have been doing that." So anyway, yeah. But you know, nobody ever got really mean or anything. It was, yeah. I recall those. Yeah, gee, been a long time. So,
what about celebrations like the religious holidays, Christmas, Easter?
Well, yeah, Easter, not too much really, but the Christmas time was a big one. Yeah, was a big one. And the man that owned the store here, he would go to California in the wintertime, and my mom, being the assistant postmistress at that time, we would move down into his old house here because we didn't have a car, and the snow would get deep, and we'd stay. And besides, there was only 4 telephones in town, and one of them was in his house, one of them was in the post office, one was at the Crown King Mine office buildings, and one at the Forest Service, and it was just a 4-party line. So somebody had to be able to field the messages and get them to people. The message had come in for somebody like Vernon Martin told me this story, that when his father died, he was working at the Crown King Mine, and Mr. Patterson walked up in the snow to tell him his dad had passed away, you know. So they'd either, if it was not an emergency, they'd have a note for him, and when they came into the store, because that was sort of the common gathering place here. But at any rate, yeah, I don't know what I was even talking about now. Gee whiz! The telephone was very important here. Very important. It was the only means of communication. Period. So. Anyway, yeah, that was the only way people could get messages was somebody that was constantly, was the old, what's the, Mayberry and, Andy Griffith and all that old phone. Yeah, that's it, yeah, the old, and the operator. Well, now Mama getting mad at the operator sometimes. Yeah. Of course, the phone would ring. There'd be 3 rings for one and 2 rings for the other, and that. And of course, somebody was always listening in. Is that funny or what? It is. It's comical.
To keep up on the town news.
Oh yeah, right.
What are some of your favorite town stories? Whether they were weather related or particular characters.
Well, there's lots of stories here. Of course, some of them I couldn't even mention probably, but I guess one of the big events, was a little later on in 1967, and the winter of 1967 was the biggest snowstorm that we've ever had here, that I know of, and that I think was ever recorded here. And there was 87 inches of snow on the level, and there was drifts that were 10 and 15 feet deep. Now you can imagine that back up in the northern part of the country or Alaska or something, but it was incredible. And there was so much stuff that happened, and people, you couldn't move, and in those days, I got the horses from the Forest Service, and I'd go around and try to check people out, me and the assistant ranger or whatever. Finally, it got up breast deep on those horses, and they could almost floundered. Finally, we got them home and got them back in their barn, and that was it. So they had a pair of snowshoes up there, and I'd get those snowshoes and I'd travel around and check on people and things like that. And the big thing was the roofs taking all that weight. And so everybody that had a house that was livable, that were living in it, people would get together and go shovel those roofs down off, get the weight off of them. The store here, I remember shoveling on the store here, because it was creaking, creak, 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 creak. Yeah.
How many people lived in town then?
I don't know how many there were. There were probably not as many as now, probably maybe 50, 75, something like that. That was about it. But it was a bad one, and it lasted for 2 or 3 weeks, it just kept on. And so anyway, there was a lot of stories that were associated with that snowstorm. And Ron Lips and a fellow by the name of Dave Martin, that's still alive, still here, and there was a person that came in from down below and said that there was a man down at Fort Misery, which is south of here about 10 miles, that was having a heart attack. And so the 3 of us started out, it was at night, and we started out down through that country there. There was no roads left. It was just like a glacier or something. There was no road, and icy, and when we went around up by the Ora Bell mine and down, if we'd ever slipped on that and gone down, we'd have gone for 1,000 feet down through there, But we did. We made it, and we got down there to a place. There was an old man and a lady down there by the name of Cooter, and we yelled at them. They were in a cabin down there, and we went in about 4 o'clock in the morning, and they made us breakfast and got us some coffee, and then we went on down, and come to find out, those people had left and gone out the other way. So there we were, you know. So anyway, long story short, yeah. So, we stayed the night, and then I had the Forest Service radio, and they sent a helicopter, and it was one of the old early versions of the helicopters. It was called a Cayman, and it was not very stout. And I had to leave my dog down there, and we did. He didn't land in Crown King. We went to Prescott, and by that time they finally got the road open, and we got back in town here. But I had to walk down and get my dog through that snow again. And so anyway, it was quite an adventure. But there was a lot of deals, and you'll have to talk to Ronnie Lips. He can tell you about that. Yeah. He's a great storyteller too. He really is, yeah. And he's a pretty straight shooter, you know. So you need to ask him about that. We're old friends, and so.
What about mining disasters or stories that your family may have shared with you of things that had happened here in Crown
Yeah.
King?
Well, there was a bad cave-in at the Crown King mine, and I really was too young to remember it. And there was a fella killed there, and you know instead of saying something, the people that owned the mine didn't say anything, and 2 or 3 days later, some people from down below the Iron King mine came up, the rescue team, and Mr. Patterson who owned the store. He was sort of the patriarch here. And he was really mad because they could have gone up there and helped dig these people out. There was 2 or 3 of them in there, and they got, you know, a couple of them out alive. But the one fellow got killed in there in the Crown King mine cave-in. So that was the only one that I really know of that actually got, you know, died here. I'm sure there were other accidents of some kinds, but most of these miners were pretty safe in what they did. They were, you know, being a miner was a skilled position actually. You had to really know what you were doing to be safe. And so when I started working in the mine, the old miner told me a good miner always protects himself first, and that was the rule I always went by. So.
What year was that cave-in?
Pardon?
Remember what year that cave-in was?
Well, I don't remember what year it was, but I think it might have been even before I was born, in 37 or in the 30s. As the Gladiator started working during the Depression times in the 30s up there, and and the Crown King, you know, I'm not quite sure, but my dad ran the mill up there. I remember that. But a lot of that stuff is beyond my memory. I'm sorry to tell you that, but that's the only one I ever knew.
I had heard something about an Air Force accident, you know, plane accident. Are you
That's true,
familiar with that?
yeah. Luke Air Force Base was a training base for the World War II fighter pilots. And they flew a plane called the AT-6 Texan, I believe it was. It was a trainer, and we had several of them that crashed up in these mountains here. And one of the worst ones was back in a place called McKinley Gulch, which is over on the north side of, and kind of like towards the Wildflower Mine. And it was a very odd story because, and Ray did some research on this, but I don't know how much he had on it, but I think Ray Singer did. Those guys were in formation, and they had those planes up, and it was a Sunday, I believe, and they weren't supposed to be flying. And it was a storm in here, and clouds, and there was fog, and they crashed one on top of the other into the mountain on the back side over there. And nobody knew where they were. And I remember somebody found them some way, and the Army came up here, and I was just a little guy, And I remember seeing a Jeep, first time I ever saw a Jeep, and they went up and got the bodies, or what was left of them, because I think it was a year or two later when they found them, the actual wreck site, and took the instruments that were valuable out of the planes, and they took those what remains and sent them to their relatives to bury. There was a family that would not accept those as being the remains of their son. For what reason, I can't tell you, but there probably wasn't much left. A year or so later, a power man was working on the power line, which came up from Mayer over the top of the mountain in those days. You know where it came and where you guys live up there. And he found this body, skeleton, underneath the power pole up there. And the guy had a broken leg, and he had crawled over several ridges and got up by the power line and died underneath that power pole. And it was that family's son. That ironic? Odd, yeah. And so that was quite a story, yeah. Yeah, quite a deal. But there was other ones that wrecked too, and during the 50s there was a fella came in and took the good parts off of them and sold them to somebody in South America or something, I don't know, packed them out, a lot of it. But there's still remnants of those wrecks around here, yeah. Some of them walked away, you know, pancaked them in the brush and walked out. But, and there was one story, I have to tell you this one. It was the same deal, and he crashed right north of town here on Mount Lawson. What happened, I don't know, but he came ripping down through the trees. He took the wings off, and the townspeople heard him crash, and they ran up there, and they found him. He was an English guy. He had been training at Luke Air Force Base. He was an Englishman, and he had a broken finger when he was laying out on his parachute, and they got him and brought him in, you know, and gave him his tea, you know, obviously the tea. And I had an aunt that had met him, and she wrote to him, and her letter came back in and had been shot down over the channel and killed there. Yeah, so some tragedies. And then there was one other air crash, and this was in, I have probably a newspaper article about it. It was in the 60s. I can't tell you what year exactly, probably middle 60s, 65. It was in the winter. I happened to hear him crash. I was at my house, and it was up by towards the Wildflower Towers. We didn't know where he was, where he'd crashed at, but it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was learning to play the guitar, and I was out there practicing 3 o'clock in the morning, and it had been a snowstorm, and there was clouds in, and this plane went in, and I knew it had crashed. So I went up to the Forest Service, and I knocked on the trailer door of one of the guys there, the assistant ranger, and Smokey Burgess. I said, "Smokey, I haven't been drinking, you know," but I swear I heard a plane crash, you know. And luckily, you know, they had the Jeep all chained up and in the shop out there, so we got in it, and we drove up, clear of the tower at Towers Mountain, and I climbed up on the tower and looked, and I couldn't see anything, and he said, "Well, we'll have to try again tomorrow, you know, we can't see any fire or anything." So coming back down, we hit these tracks in the road, and he said, "Oh, there's a bear track." And I said, "Wait a minute, let me get out and look at it," and it was a man track. And we went on down the road a little, and he hit the ruts in the road that we'd made in the snow. There was about 13, 15 inches of snow. And there was a fella there. He had one low-cut shoe on, no shoe on the other foot, and he had a broken ankle, and he was hobbling down the road. So we got him in there, And then we got him back down safe, and then my brother and I went and backtracked him up the side of the mountain to the wreck. And there was a fella pinned in the front of this plane, a big man, and his legs were pinned in there, and it was on the side, and he was against the body of another one. There were just three of them all together in that plane. One of them was dead. And he said, "I told that son of a gun to turn right, and he turned left." And there had been a light on one of the towers up there, and they thought it was at Prescott Airport, but they were drinking. It was a lot. They were drunk. And we couldn't get him out of the plane. We didn't have anywhere to put him, so we covered him up with blankets and all that. And then the next morning, the sheriff's posse came up and there was a doctor with him, and they gave him a shot and stuff, and finally got him out of there. And the upshot was that his legs were broken in 13 places from his knees down. But he survived it, and he came back here, and I didn't get to see him, but he was wanting to look me up, you know. Right. So that was a life-saving deal, you know. It was just one of those things, you know, that happened. Yeah, it was quite a little deal there.
What are some of the King characters that you remember? You know, you had talked about a miner earlier that was very, very short in stature, but a tremendous eater.
Oh, yeah.
And other people that kind of stand out as being particularly memorable.
Well, there was a lot of characters here. This one person's name was Harry Dezee, Dezee. His folks had come from Holland to the United States, and they were all trapeze and gymnasts and trapeze in the circus. But he was a real short guy, and he worked at the old Del Pasco mine up there. And I knew him I'd go up there and we'd hunt together a little bit, and sometimes I'd go up and stay the night up there, and he was working back in the tunnel. And Harry, he got ill, and he came down, and my brother and his wife took care of him quite a lot, and he would stay with us. He must have starved when he was a child, because every time that he would sit at the table when everybody else was done, he'd take everything that was left and eat it. I don't know where he put it, but he did. And we all remember him, and he had some kind of a brain injury when he was a kid, I think, and so he was, he was just a little different. I wouldn't say he had mental problems, but he had some kind of defect there. He was quite a character, Harry Dezee. And there was other people here. There's a fellow up that's has his picture in the saloon up there, Hugh Campbell. He was born around Bisbee in southern Arizona, came up here to work in the mines, and then he went into the war, in World War II, and he was quite a fellow, and he saw a lot of action. He was on the invasion Normandy, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And there was a fellow at that time that did the comic strips for the Army called Willie and Joe. I don't know if you've ever been familiar with those, but it was a comic strip very common to Willie and Joe. And Hugh Campbell was a fairly short, stocky guy, and he was the model for the one. In the comic strip, there was a tall guy and there was a short guy, Willie and Joe at the front, you know. And Carl Malden was the fellow that wrote the comic strips. And when Hugh died, he was at his funeral because he had been the model for the short one there. But he was a miner, and he worked around, and I knew him very well. And he had all kinds of medals and stuff, but he never talked very much about the war or anything like that. But he was quite a character. Grant Van Tilburg. The Van Tilburg family was a big, an old-time family here. They'd come into Crown King, I think, into the Lincoln mine about 1911, and then they had moved over to what was called the Spud Ranch on Towers Mountain, and they lived there. And then they came down and they had a little ranch here, just up top of the hill. Let's see, where the Burkes live now. That was a little ranch. That whole area in there was their headquarters. And Glenn, the dad, he ran cattle, and they had the two sons, Don and Grant. And so Grant, they mined or ran cattle or whatever, but Grant worked in the Savoy mine. I worked with him in there, and he bought the saloon after Tom Anderson died. And so that was, you know, a lot of fun times in that old saloon, and he was quite a character. He was kind of like a Will Rogers type, yeah, and he was a neat guy, yeah, he was good. And I worked underground with him when I first started working in the mines, and I went back there. We were 1,800 feet back in the Savoy mine, and there was the big muck pile to shovel and get into the car, you know, and so he said, well, there you are. And there was two shovels. There was one regular square point shovel, and then there was a snow scoop there. Yeah, I looked at the snow scoop, and I don't know who'd use that, you know. So I grabbed the other shovel and I loaded the car. I loaded a couple of them, and he pushed them out. And then he came back and said, well, here, I'll muck one. And he grabbed the snow shovel and loaded that car with it, and bam, 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 you know. I go, whoa, you know, I was just a skinny little old guy. And I learned a lot from him in there in the mine, and I learned to drill and blast and all of that kind of stuff. So he was quite a character, and like I say, he was a Will Rogers type. Everybody loved the guy. He just a great man. He was a great man. He really was. And he had that bar there. And he had just come in from work and opened it up for a couple of hours, and people would have a beer or two out on the porch, and then he'd close it. And then on the weekends, they'd have their little dance there or something, and that was it, you know. So he worked for several years over there. And that mine did work during the bad part of the Crown King Depression, they'd call it. That was along about, let's see, 58 I worked in there, but it worked for several years there, and there was a mill. Just him and a couple other guys, it would be it, yeah.
What about some of the historical figures? Like you had mentioned to me earlier, that Pancho Villa really was a Crown King.
Well, according to my Aunt Helen, and of course this was back in the older days, I believe that his name that he used here was Angelo Unaware, or something like that, and I'll have to get her history for you to look at. She was a school teacher, and she was a straight shooter, but he was here, and of course there's a lot of stories that's probably been blown up about him here, but he was actually here. And they found out that was really who he was, but he was sort of a troublemaker, and they ran him out of town. So you can take that for what it is. That's all I really know about it.
What about the Indians?
The Indians. Not all the Indians went on the reservation. There were Indians here. I know there was Indians here when my great aunt was here, because they always told the story. They were camped. There was a big campground where Bear Creek Cabins is. And in fact, we used to go over there and pick up flint and things like that. So it had historically been one there for a long while. And they were camped there, and she had a pair of red shoes. She was just a little girl, and they liked those red shoes, and they wanted them real bad. They were willing to trade whatever for them, but she kept the red shoes. So I know there were some Indians here. They didn't cause any problems, But also there were Indians that lived down on Turkey Creek below Cleator, because Tommy Cleator, which he's passed on now, told me that there was a group of them that used to come in and trade at the store with his dad there in Cleator. But they were peaceful, and they, finally attrition, just finally they died out, by attrition in the years. But there was still Native American people here that didn't go on the reservation, that just finished their lives out here, and that's what happened. Yeah. So that's really all I know about them now. When we talk about the Indians and historically, of course, we had the Apaches and the Yavapais people here. The Apaches were later in time. Earlier than that, of course, on the Agua Fria National Monument out there on the mesas, there's a lot of ruins. And those people were contemporary with the Hohokam, the early cultures, Sinagua and all of that. And they would come to Horse Thief in the summer, the able-bodied ones. And they had forts over there. There's still remnants. And since we've had the Lane 2 fire, I've found several places that are remnants of old pit houses there. So we know that those people were earlier than the Apaches so anyway, it's real interesting, actually. We don't know how, but at least 1,000 years, and maybe older than that, that they were up in this Horse Thief area. The remnants of things you find out here were hunting camps for the Apaches and so forth like that. Yeah.